Chapter 241, Blitzkrieg 2. After she was done talking, she looked at the subordinate spirits of the Mammon family. Then Kaiwan opened her mouth first. I've got a question. She moved her lips to try to speak, but found it a bit hard to say anything right away. Skathak kindly waited for her. After hesitating for a while, Kaiwan finally asked rather impatiently, if Sitri is really the Queen of Sloth, why did she hide it from us so far? Why did she just seclude herself instead of reigning as the queen? Kaiwan couldn't understand. She was a queen with one of the 7 deadly sins and godly energy. But why did she live as one of the 5 directors of the dungeon market rather than a queen? Was it because she was scared of the other 3 kings? Was it because she might be assassinated if they knew the Queen of Sloth was alive? Given the political circumstances, it was highly likely that the other 3 kings were not aware of the fact that the Queen of Sloth was alive, or they might have not known that Sitri was one of the 5 directors of the dungeon market. Even the records on the Mammon family did not indicate that Sitri was the Queen of Sloth, so it was very possible that the 3 kings didn't know about her existence. According to various records, the Queen of Sloth always covered her face and body with a black veil and robe. As a result, it wasn't strange at all that the King of Pride, the King of Envy, and the King of Lust regard the Queen of Sloth and the red-haired witch, Mammon's lover, as 2 different women. In fact, this kind of thinking was the most plausible. Otherwise, the fact that the King of Greed and the Queen of Sloth were lovers would have provoked the other kings too much. They would have thought that their romantic relationship would have stood in the way of their alliance. At Kaiwan's asking, Skathach made a frown. It wasn't because her question was difficult to answer. It was because even Skathach didn't know why. Skathach looked at the flames of the red lotus burning in the air. Unlike Skathach herself and Gusion, who had been confined to the labyrinth of greed for the past 1,000 years, Armin moved in and out of the labyrinth of greed until recently. Moreover, he always met Sitri with Yong-ho. Maybe he might have some clues. Yong-ho and Kaiwan also turned to Aemon. Aemon whispered in a quiet voice, I am not sure of her intentions, but Tebony. When I saw her after 1,000 years, she was different from what I used to know before. Test. On the day when the celestial door was closed, she was probably injured very much. Injured? Yes, because it was a fierce fight. It wouldn't be strange if I say that she had been so severely wounded that she could not have healed even with the passage of 1,000 years. Moreover, Sitri was with Mammon until his last moment. Just before or after Mammon closed the celestial door, something that Mammon's 12 spirits didn't know might have happened. If I speak based on my impression of her, Sitri, as she is now, is not complete. She will not be able to properly exercise her power as the Queen of Sloth. There was a crack in the firm solidarity of the 3 directors. An alien force penetrated through the flow of their mana that got united as one until a moment ago. It was like an explosion. It was instant, but it was a tremendous power that completely pushed out the mana of the 3 directors. Abrasax, who was proud of his strongest mana at the dungeon market, was more sensitive to mana than any of the 5 directors. The moment he faced Sitri, the Queen of Sloth's mana, he felt it keenly. That was the power of a true queen, equipped with both one of the 7 deadly sins and the godly energy. Abrasax felt he was spaced out. He didn't hear anything about her from the King of Pride. What he heard from the King of Pride was that Sitri was Mammon's lover, and that she was a great demon who lived for a long, long time. What should he do? How should he deal with the queen in front of him? A brief moment was like eternity. Abrasax saw Sitri in astonishment, and Bifrons tried to trigger the hidden secret weapon. Amid the chaotic situation, Orobas, the strongest Herculean power, left himself to his instinct as a red demon. When everyone paid attention to Sitri, Orobas hit the ground. Then he threw himself towards Samael, who had not yet escaped from Abrasax's mana. Their distance narrowed in an instant. Orobas threw his punch at Samael's eyes. He had nothing like a personal grudge against her. He just moved in a way that was most advantageous to his unique combat sense as a red demon. In some way he acted based on his cold, rational judgment. There were 2 options that Orobas could think of. One of them was for him to be Samael's ally. It was the best option. Although Sitri showed obvious hostility toward him, Samael joined hands with the 3 other directors. It was 4-1. Under any circumstance, they could beat her. But the situation would be completely different if Samael joined hands with Citri. If that was the case, the matrix of the fighting would be 3-2. Given Citri's extraordinary power, it was highly likely that the three directors would be defeated, although they were numerically superior. Orobas was not sure which of the two situations would unfold. Therefore, Orobas decided to eliminate the number of cases. If Samael died here, the relative superiority of 3-1 would not change anyway. Orobas threw his punch. Even though he was obsessed with striking fast without any preparation, his blow was powerful beyond imagination. If he struck her accurately, it was clear that her delicate body would be smashed at once. At that moment, the Demon King's power, which Samael exerted desperately, was a little faster than his punch. His fist, aiming at the center of Samael's chest, hit her shoulders slightly. But even his missed punch was powerful enough to smash her shoulders. They were in tatters, as if they were swept away by an explosion, and there were severe cuts on her body, exposed to the impact of his punch. The black wings, located behind her broken shoulders, literally evaporated. Even the 5 directors did not know about each other's power. Instead of thinking about why his punching missed, Orobas immediately prepared a second attack. Samael failed to exert her power again because she closed her eyes in severe pain. All she could do was scream terribly in pain. Abrasax and Bifrons finally understood the situation. The two hurriedly turned their eyes towards Samael, only to find Samael screaming in pain. Samael was still alive. Orobas hastily turned around. Instead of punching her head, he slammed her in the back with his fist. His punch missed. When he turned his eyes after punching, Citri already began to strike his chest. This time, the eyes of Citri and Orobas crossed. Orobas clenched his teeth, but shortly afterward, his giant red body bounced off forcefully. Abrasax and Bifrons radiated their mana at the same time. Abrasax's mana pressed on Samael, and Bifron's mana revived the mana of the other 3 directors and pushed out Citri, who was releasing power as the Queen of Sloth fully. Blood was gushing all over Samael's body, who was trembling hard. Her bloody discharge stained her white dress. "Red, kill her, Abrasax shouted, full of malice. There was already joy in his face. But Bifrons was different. He was breaking into a cold sweat endlessly. Now was not the time for him to waste mana on Samael. Abrasax. Citri shouted at him. Abrasax looked back at Citri as if he suddenly came to his senses. Orobas, who had been bounced out, also got up quickly and looked at Citri. The godly energy of sloth was shining. The godly energy that found its owner paired with the sin of sloth, creating a tremendous mana. Abrasax's mana that had been squeezing down Samael waned quickly. Besides, the combined mana of the 3 directors who seemed to swallow up Citri at any moment was pushed out once more. The Queen of Sloth Abrasax was astonished. Sensitive to mana, he understood what was happening right before his eyes. That was why he was overwhelmed with instinctive fear. His mana was weakened. His mana that overpowered Samael was not simply pushed out or evaporated. Actually, it was weakened. It then vanished. But the rate of its weakening was unusually fast. It seemed as if he was swept away by the torrent of time. Citri injected mana into the godly energy again. The godly energy that resonated with the sin of sloth released its inherent power. Corrosion of the boundary, that was the name Mammon coined for the power. All the hostile forces that entered the boundary of this force were quickly weakened. It then perished. Chapter 242. Blitzkrieg 3. Abrasax also shuddered. He recalled when he stood before the King of Pride. It was the same. In some way, he shuddered more this time. Citri's mana was as strong as his, or rather weaker than his. Nonetheless, with the power of sloth alone, she blocked his mana several times as big as his. The power of the invisible wall of corrosion that weakened and eliminated everything was terrifying. Orobas couldn't dare charge at her. The reason Citri pushed him out in the first encounter was because she wanted to get hold of Samael. If she had used the invisible wall of corrosion at that time to bring out the power of sloth, he might have received a fatal blow. He could not even think of that scenario at this point. However, Orobas was not stricken with fear just like Bifrons and Abrasax. His sense of combat captured something new. He noticed Citri's arm holding the mana of sloth was trembling. Blood came out of her lips. Attack her now. Orobas struck the air and gave off some mana. But Citri immediately triggered the godly energy of sloth to eliminate his mana. But she could not bear it anymore and spat out blood. Her chest and head were stained with blood. The blood flowing along her cleavage prompted Abrasax and Bephirons to attack her again. Kill her. Abrasax poured out his mana once again. It was foolish to use mana to strike down the invisible wall of corrosion that weakened mana itself. Rather, it was more efficient to attack it with pure mana. Bifrons moved his 8 hands at the same time. Then he triggered the magic circles again. He then transmitted them to Abrasax instead of pouring out the flow of mana on Citri. Let me finish the fight now. Bifrons decided that he should not miss the Queen of Sloth, for she was simply too powerful. The queen, who had her own godly energy, had far superior power than he expected. The invisible wall of corrosion and the combined mana of the 3 directors clashed once again. Their mana was weakened and scattered again, but it was not quite the same as before. The boundaries of the invisible wall of corrosion were pushed back gradually. Citri, who was holding the godly energy with trembling hands, vomited blood again. A little more. Blood came out from Abrasax's eyes and nose too. It was the first time he ever dealt with this kind of enormous mana, who had 6 horns since his birth. Citri now staggered. Blood came out again from her mouth. The boundary of the invisible wall of the corrosion was now reduced to less than half of it. Samael raised her head. Dubbed the fastest wing, she spread her remaining wing and hugged Citri with trembling hands. No, no, Orobas shouted instinctively. Citri squeezed out her remaining power, and Samael released her own power. Bang! A huge mana struck the ground. It not only destroyed the headquarters of the dungeon market, but also rammed deep into the ground. The surrounding area was shaken as if there was an earthquake. Abrasax collapsed. As someone who operated mana directly, he knew that at the last minute, Citri and Samael disappeared. Although he could not know what made them disappear at once, he clearly knew it was Samael's power. Orobas hurriedly expanded his senses to check his surroundings, but it was useless. He could detect everything within a radius of 500 meters, but Citri and Samael were not within that range. Bifrons gasped for breath. Thanks to an old friend of his who always gave advice, he could come to his senses quickly. He lost the Queen of Sloth. It was obvious that Samael would not join hands with them. If that was the case, now was not the time for him to worry and fear. He had to do the next as soon as possible. Samael is now our enemy. Orobas, give orders to your men. You must destroy Samael's dungeon. Out of the 5 directors of the dungeon market, Citri was the most secretive one. Aside from the fact that she was the Queen of Sloth, the location of her dungeon was not even known. On the other hand, everybody knew Samael's dungeon because the special auction house of the dungeon market was her own dungeon. The 5 directors of the dungeon market were basically demon kings with their own dungeons. Samael, the master of her dungeon, had several subordinate spirits. If they destroyed the heart of her dungeon to annihilate her subordinate spirits, they could inflict great damage on Samael where she was. The employees of the dungeon market headquarters appeared in various places. They didn't know what happened to the dungeon market today. They were in a chaotic situation, not knowing about the sudden tragedy that engulfed the market today. Bifrons caught his breath again. As his old friend commented, Bifrons' intellect was uniquely strong in analysis. He mentioned the most important thing in the current situation. Citri and Samael are seriously injured. So, we still have time. Even though it's hard to overpower Citri, we must take away everything from Samael. Citri was the most veiled out of the 5 directors. Apart from the fact that she was the Queen of Sloth, the location of her dungeon was not even known. On the other hand, everybody knew the location of Samael's dungeon. The dungeon market's special auction house was her dungeon. The dungeon market was like a beast with 5 heads. They had to wrap up the current turmoil by expelling Samael as an enemy. They had to stop Samael's forces from joining their hostile forces. Our king will reproach us in that case, Abrasax muttered. Looking at the results alone, their mission had failed. The 3 directors were supposed to go under the King of Pride, but they didn't appease Citri and Samael, nor did they get rid of the 2. This was the worst situation they could think of. So, we have to hurry. We must get rid of Samael's power. Even if it's impossible to take over the whole power of the dungeon market, We must hand over almost all of it to the King of Pride. Abrasax stood up, slowly nodding. Orobas kept swallowing, looking at the spot where Citri was standing. The Queen of Sloth. She was an enemy he had to confront again, and when he clashed with her again, he had to fight in a different way. The three directors did not delay any more. Orobas threw himself to join the forces attacking Samael's dungeon, and Abrasax opened the door to the eastern region, which would have been turned from the territory of the king of Gluttony to that of the King of Pride by now. The second mission of the powerful masters who hoisted the flags was to declare war on the Queen of Fury Bifrons, who was left alone, turned toward the north. Today, which might be the watershed of demonic history, was not over yet. Betrayal had always been fatal throughout all ages and countries. The traitor was an insider, not an outsider. No matter how large and solid a giant castle was built to defend against outside enemies, they could not avoid the traitor among them from stabbing them from behind. The Dungeon Market's special auction house, befitting Samael's dungeon, one of the 5 directors, boasted of a strong defense that made it meaningless to compare it to the dungeons of ordinary masters. But, as expected, it helplessly collapsed at the traitor's attack. When Orobas arrived, more than half of the dungeon was already destroyed. Almost half of Samael's subordinate spirits were killed by Orobas and Bifrons' subordinates. Standing in front of the boundary line separating the deep floor of her dungeon and the special auction house, Orobas frowned. Samael's right-hand man and the butler of the special auction house, Incubus Lord Karot, was standing before him, with his body covered with blood. "Excellent, quite impressive," Orobas commented briefly. He said that from the bottom of his heart. About 20 crimson ogres belonging to Orobas' assault squad were scattered around him, torn apart in a terrible shape. Moreover, at least 5 kinds of monsters were also sacrificed, with the strong scent of their blood mixed with that of the ogres. Perhaps Karot must have resisted their attack alone, so that Samael's subordinate spirits could gain time to escape or strengthen their barriers. Karot glared at Orobas without any response. As if to collect whatever strength he had, he gasped for breath. He didn't ask why Orobas betrayed Samael or where she was now. That kind of question was just meaningless in the current situation. Orobas smoothed out the wrinkles of his eyebrows, looking at Karot. He even smiled. He liked the man a lot for a long time. He wished Samael had not turned into his enemy. He didn't show any signs of attacking. Flying nearly a dozen meters in the blink of an eye, he struck Karot with his fist. Karot could not avoid it. Karot activated the magnetic field immediately, but it was smashed as soon as it was created. Karot's left shoulder disappeared. There was no trace of it left at the tremendous impact of his attack. As in the case of Samael, Karot didn't avoid it. Orobas targeted his shoulder on purpose. Karot couldn't even scream because Orobas' fist, which blew away his shoulder, punched his neck and mouth. Orobas grabbed him, then threw him roughly to the ground. He was thrust into the ground with a force that could break it. Karot, whose bones were smashed to pieces, wriggled like an insect. Orobas stepped on his right arm with his feet. Then he tightened his feet to crush Karot's fingers and shoulders. This time, a terrible scream broke in his mouth. Then he stopped screaming, since he could hardly breathe now. Trampling down his arms, Orobas looked down at Karot. He had no intention of killing Karot right now. It wasn't because he felt Karot was too valuable to be killed. He still had to collect some more information from Karot, such as the location of a hiding place outside the dungeon where Samael could hide or specific information about her power. Of course, it didn't mean Orobas had time to torture him slowly. Moreover, he had to deal a blow to Samael by killing Karot, so he intended to keep Karot alive at least until the necromancer who would extract information from his soul arrived. "You won't die just because of these wounds," right? Orobas spoke to him in a friendly manner, but Karot desperately tried to cast a spell. But Orobas destroyed his half-finished magic by smashing his left foot. I can help but admit it. Again, it wasn't about Karot. Orobas did not deny the pleasure arising deep inside him. He felt like his frustration with his humiliating fight against the Queen of Sloth and Samael disappeared a bit. The 3 directors went under the King of Pride for different reasons, of course. Chapter 243, Blitzkrieg 4. Abrasax feared the King of Pride. At the same time, he wanted to run around, showing off his power freely. He was like a thrilled child, so anxious to show off his power and the dungeon market everywhere. Bifrons wanted the unification of the demon world, and he hoped he could join in the process of unification. The reason he went under the King of Pride was simple. Under the current situation, he felt the King of Pride was most likely to achieve the unification of the demon world. Then, what was the reason for Orobas to follow the King of Pride? Orobas thought at first that it was because he wanted a struggle. He also thought that it was because he wanted to stand on the winning side. But in the end, he had the same reason as Abrasax. He just wanted to use his hard-won strength and overwhelming violence to his heart's content. He also wanted more wealth and power. Orobas looked at the closed door of the deep flow instead of Carrot, who had fainted, unable to endure the pain. After taking a deep breath, he swung his clenched fist with full power. Not only the heavy steel door, but also the wall attached to it was smashed heavily. The whole dungeon shook, as if the dungeon itself was screaming. Orobas once again felt satisfied. In order to thoroughly destroy the enemy, Samael, he stepped into the deep floor. The dungeon market had dominated the commercial dealings of the demon world for the past 1,000 years. In terms of influence, it could be called by far the strongest organization in the history of the demon world. Nevertheless, the dungeon market was always fair. They did not act like a bully, nor did they pose any threat. They treated customers at a reasonable price. Besides, they even promoted the welfare of the demon world by supplying food at a low price. This kind of policy lasted over 1,000 years. Inhabitants of the demon world became accustomed to the policy of the dungeon market. Eventually, they forgot how dangerous an organization they could become. Even the powerful masters of estates were not wary of the dungeon market, even though they kept a suspicious eye on their neighbors and their subordinate spirits. Therefore, the sudden hostilities by the dungeon market were fatally detrimental to its reputation as much as the betrayal of the insiders. The King of Envy looked around with an embarrassed expression. Every place was under the threat of the King of Pride's forces. Even though he was moving secretly, his location was exposed, and many of the reinforcement units who promised to arrive by now did not arrive. Many of the masters standing by him complained about the sudden loss of their mana. Some of them lost almost half of their mana. Besides, the King of Envy sensed that some of his dungeons had been destroyed. Even the giant castle of Envy, his main base, was attacked. He needed to know why. Unable to suppress his anger, the king gave out a screech and released his mana. He expressed intense feelings through the 7 towering horns on his head, the childish King of Pride. The King of Envy didn't know how it happened, but he knew clearly who initiated this turmoil. The intense feelings he released turned into black smoke. It was shaped like a demon. Faced with the King of Envy, the army of the King of Pride knelt to express due manners. When tens of thousands of troops on the plains lowered their heads to show their respect, it created such a spectacular scene. The King of Envy felt angry, though. The subject of their respect was not the King of Envy, but the sky Leviathan, somebody said in a low voice, which infuriated him all the more. Currently, the only one who could call his name was the King of Lust, who achieved great things with him over 1,000 years. Only she was equal to the King of Envy himself. The King of Envy stared at the sky with bloodshot eyes. The King of Pride, wearing golden armor and spreading his white wings, accompanied by his own royal troops, was watching over the ground arrogantly. "You bastard! What the hell are you doing?" shouted the King of Envy. "The dungeon market stands by my side." The King of Pride put it bluntly, and the King of Envy blinked, speechless for a moment. The King of Pride fully enjoyed the stupid change of expression on his face. Then he descended toward the ground, stepping on the sky like a staircase. When a delivery man from the dungeon market came to the door, any master opens the door without any doubt. No one thinks that the item purchased from the dungeon market contains a deadly magic bomb that will destroy the dungeon as well as its heart. The King of Envy hastily looked at the house masters around him. Each of them, whose strength was reduced by half, looked at him with despair. The destruction of the dungeon's heart meant the death of the dungeon, and it caused the death of the subordinate spirits who signed the contract through the dungeon. The death of the subordinate spirits was special. Some of the masters were consumed with severe stress. Some fell on the floor and wept. The King of Pride landed on the ground. The ground troops of the King of Pride showed due manners to him with their heads lowered. Dungeon spirits are different from subordinate spirits. They are just bound by contacts. If they can sacrifice themselves, they can also act against their masters, like the numerous dungeon spirits that you purchase through a secret deal. The King of Envy could not respond at all. He felt like he was spaced out. The dungeon market is taking side with the King of Pride. The 5 directors in charge of the secret deal at the dungeon market are now the King of Pride's subordinates. He couldn't believe it. But the current reality facing him proved it all. The King of Envy looked around again. Some of his troops showed due manners to the King of Pride. Some of the masters who were with him were seen no more. The King of Pride did not hold back his laughter. He shrugged ostensibly. "Oh, don't. I have anyone who can sacrifice their lives for me. Consumables that can give their lives for you." The King of Envy once again expressed his terrible feeling. The black smoke that spread around them was united to form a giant shape, and the king stood behind it. Then he reached out to his waist in succession and pulled out the godly energy of pride in the shape of a sword. The King of Pride saw the godly energy of pride. After suppressing his yearning for it with a smile, the King of Pride grabbed the godly energy of lust in the shape of a dagger in one hand. It was a secret that only the 3 kings who shared their great achievement knew. Contrary to what was known to the outside world, the 3 kings of Pride, Envy, and Lust did not have the godly energy pairing with their respective sin. On that day, 1,000 and hundreds of years ago, the 3 kings exchanged their godly energy with each other. It was one of the measures to prevent their betrayal amongst themselves. "We exchanged them too long ago. It's time I took mine back." The troops of the King of Pride raised themselves at once. At the same time, the king opened up the horns and mana that he had suppressed until then. The King of Envy shuddered. His original plan to shatter this childish king was shattered. It wasn't just because of the King of Pride's terrifying mana that would dominate the entire battlefield. It's a lie. The King of Envy barely uttered one word. But the King of Pride smiled brightly. He stepped forward and approached him. The sunset came soon. After talking with Guxian, Yong-ho dismissed his subordinate spirits and sat down on the throne in the Demon King's room. Since Catalina and Kaiwan were not there, the spacious room was tranquil. He then rummaged through his pocket and took out a golden key that was a little smaller than his palm. It was the final reward when he defeated Guxian, the last floor master of the arena. On the 13th floor, the bottom floor of the Labyrinth of Greed, is Mammon's secret room, and you can open the door of the secret room with only this key. Unfortunately, that's all I know. I don't know what's in the secret room. Recalling Guxian's explanation, Yong-ho grabbed the key lightly. After taking his breath, he corrected his posture. He closed his eyes to access the virtual space of the dungeon market Citri, the Queen of Sloth, who was the only one who kept Mammon's side until his final moment on that day, 1,000 and hundreds of years ago. Yong-ho had no intention of questioning why she concealed her identity. It was funny for him to comfort her while mentioning Mammon's last moment, but he thought he should meet Citri. Whatever it was, he wanted to have a conversation with her. It looked funny, but he thought he would feel relieved when he heard her calling him "my dear customer" like before. He felt that peculiar sense while accessing the virtual space. He slowly opened his eyes and looked straight ahead. There was no one in the white space. As he already experienced it several times, he looked up a little higher, not embarrassed. Soon he would hear a voice informing him of Citri's absence. It would be not too late for him to decide after hearing the voice whether to wait for Citri or just go back. Et recognition number 9 for descendant of the man. To Yong-ho Cheon, the current master of the Mammon family. Recognition has been completed. Welcome. Citri is currently attending a meeting of the 5 directors at the headquarters of the dungeon market. You can chat with Citri at this time. Given that there was no mention of his option of waiting, it seemed that the meeting would not end anytime soon. Right at that moment, the voice of a lively and cheerful girl echoed in his mind, contrary to the rather low and hard voice of a woman, Master. CSD. Gardamundi, the messenger of the Queen of Fury, has come to see you. Currently, she is waiting at the entrance of the dungeon. It was Lucia. Since she became strong thanks to her repeated growth, she could exchange a short conversation with him, even when he was connected to the virtual space master. At Lucius' repeated call, Yong-ho nodded slowly. Somehow, he felt heavy, but he decided to go back instead of waiting in the white virtual space. He looked straight ahead for the last time before leaving. It seemed that Citri, who was asleep, appeared and said hello to him in a hurry. Master, I am coming. Maybe he could reassess the virtual space tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. He closed his eyes and got disconnected from his dedicated virtual space. Chapter 244. Acceptance 1. Blowing heavily between the canyons, the winter wind left behind a sharp scar. A light smell of blood spread widely on the wind. Samael was dying. She suffered the loss of her left arm and one wing, but the real blow was Abrasak's mana that was squeezing her body. Abrasak's mana with snake blood was poison itself. Although she shook off his mana by all means, just a little bit of poison that remained inside her body ate away her soul and mana. Citri, hiding in a crack in the rock, hugged Samael tightly. She held her head in her chest to give her some warmth. She could not see ahead well. Citri herself was not sure if she was poisoned by Abrasak's poison or if it was simply because of her failing stamina. As the fastest wing of the dungeon market, Samael's power as a demon king was a space jump. As one of the 5 directors who was considered to be the same as the kings, except that she had no sin and godly energy, her power lagged far behind that of Stravadi, who was the owner of the unclaimed land in the eastern area. Citri could not clearly locate where she and Samael were located. However, she was convinced that she was far from the headquarters of the dungeon market. Maybe she jumped hundreds of kilometers away from it. She felt dizzy. The wounds of her soul she suffered on the day of Mammon's death were opened up again. The price she had to pay for using the power of sloth excessively was harsher than expected. However, she had no choice but to use the power of sloth once again. Monsters were gathering toward her as if they smelled the blood blown on the wind. She had to avoid fighting them by all means. As things stood now, even a group of trifling ogres were a grave threat to her life. The power of hiding, one of the attributes of sloth, wrapped around Citri and Samael, separating them from the world Samael. The reason why Samael was in serious condition was not just because she was poisoned by Abrasak's. She had one more reason, which troubled Citri's mind. At some point, Samael's mana was weakened sharply. Moreover, it was not just a simple weakening. The maximum amount of her mana itself decreased. Obviously, this was caused by the death of her subordinate spirits. Citri could not think of any other reason. 3 betrayed directors were in control of the dungeon market. Besides, they already acquired the special auction house inside the dungeon market, which was Samael's base. It was only a matter of time that the entire forces of Samael fell into the hands of the 3 directors. Citri had to inform Yong-ho of this. She also had to warn the King of Violence and the Queen of Fury against this. Otherwise, they would collapse helplessly. Mammon Citri closed her eyes, caressing Samael. She could not remain conscious anymore. Like water was leaking from a broken vessel, her strength was constantly getting out of the wounds of her soul. The winter wind blew. Citri, who finally exerted her strength, lost consciousness. She fell into a deep sleep. Catalina, who always slept until late in the morning, found it hard to move around in the morning, but Uriah was jumping here and there vigorously, as always, as if she couldn't control her overflowing energy. This is the baby meerkat's bed, and next to it is Baduk's bed. And that one over there is the white wolf's bed. Uriah's room, also called the nursing room in the past, was very spacious. Raising her little hand, Uriah pointed to the beds of her friends sharing the room. The baby dungeon meerkat's bed was a miniature bed just right for a doll play, and Baduk's was an extra-large bed that would allow even an ogre to lie down. Meowing, wall wall like Uriah, the baby meerkat and Baduk raised their voices, jumping around. They were all smiles in a cheerful mood. However, the white wolf, the head of a group of wolves that once followed Embryo, remained silent with a complex and subtle expression. Unlike Baduk, he kept the attributes of a 4-legged beast, so instead of a bed, he had a fluffy blanket and a straw suitable for leaning. Uriah was upset a bit because the white wolf didn't respond well, as she wished. Uriah turned around and pointed to the pink bed opposite to Baduk's bed. It was the princess's bed that had a separate curtain, as well as a roof on the bed. "This is my bed. Isn't it pretty? Sister Kaiwan bought this blanket for me when she visited the human world with the master." As if she boasted, Uriah moved up and down the soft and fluffy cotton blanket. Obviously, she signaled to Skathach with a glance, asking her to touch it. as she was responsible for making her thrilled like this. Skathak did not refuse Uria's favor. After stroking Uria's head as well as the cotton blanket, she pointed to the large mattress in the middle of the room and the blanket spread over it. "Then, what is this?" at Skathak's asking. Uria scratched her face instead of immediately replying. Then she said while twisting her body slightly, "Hehehe, I think we will feel lonely if each of us sleeps separately. So, we're going to sleep together at night." Only then did Skathash understand why each of their beds was so clean. She said with a big smile, "Hey Uria then, shall I sleep here with you guys tonight?" "Really? Are you sure?" Uria asked with her eyes wide open. "With her eyes wide open too," Skathach replied. "Yes, I mean it." Uria screamed and hugged her. Hugging her in her arms, Skathash closed her eyes. She was grateful that the first place she visited after leaving her mansion in 1,000 years was Urias' room. Watching them at a distance, Gusyeon and Yong-ho spoke at the same time. "It's warm and cozy here." "Yeah, it is." In particular, Gusyeon's gaze and voice contained his mixed feelings. Skathash had always liked children. Skathak, who could be called the incarnation of life, could not get pregnant with Gusyeon's baby. As they had fundamentally different attributes from the beginning, it was inevitable. The Queen of Fury has requested for a meeting. Instead of indulging in idle thoughts, Gusyeon brought out a different topic. Yong-ho nodded slowly, recalling his meeting with Gardamundi yesterday afternoon. "It seems like she wants to attack the territory of the King of Gluttony with us. Of course, she wants to discuss the details of the meeting." The Queen of Fury did not know that the King of Gluttony was killed. If she had known that, she would have hurried to attack a little earlier. "Well, I think there are many guys who can give you better advice than I, so let me skip it." But Gusyeon, who blurred at the end of him speaking, dropped the cigarette that he was going to put in his mouth habitually. After looking at Skathach and Uria still holding each other tightly with a pleasant expression, he said, "I recommend you occupy the 11th floor before going to the meeting. Since you've been recognized by Eustia, you won't have any big difficulties. Even if Lucia couldn't take full control of the 11th floor, you might get UNOS recognition. What I mean is, there is nothing to lose if you challenge the 11th floor." Just like Gusyeon said, if Yong-ho got the recognition of Virgo Yuno guarding the 11th floor, who was counting the stars, Mammon's godly energy would be complete. So, it was better for Yong-ho to hurry up. There are only good episodes about this lady named Yuno, who I feel a bit uncomfortable to call a woman. "Is it true?" asked Yong-ho. "Actually, that's true. Although she isn't as good as Skathach, she has a pretty good personality. She was the cook of the Mammon family, as well as a great wizard." "Oh, sorry, what you want to know about her is nothing like this. She is a beauty. Yes, she is really beautiful. She has a slim figure, and she is a beauty with a different charm than Alun or Skathach," Gusyeon replied in a subtle voice. At that moment, the flames of the Red Lotus arose in the air above Yong-ho's headmaster. "The power of your anguish is increasing." "Nope, and I wasn't curious about her look." Yong-ho, who cut off Aemon's words in the middle, frowned without finishing his words. Gusyeon laughed heartily and said, "That's why I like my master. He is honest." Yong-ho sighed. After holding back Aemon, who was trying to say something, he changed the topic. "Let's stop the nonsense here. Let me proceed with making you my subordinate spirit. In fact, everyone said you should be the top priority because I've reserved the spot for you for a long time. Ha ha ha. Do you think you can really control me? Don't worry, I think I can even make Skathach follow suit after you." It wasn't just Yong-ho's manner that became strong as a result of the synthetic reinforcement. The power of greed also became stronger than before, so he could possess more subordinate spirits than before. It was unreasonable for him to possess 12 spirits like Mammon, but it seemed possible for him to possess as many as 10. "Then, why don't you do it in the afternoon after lunch? I think it will be efficient in many ways for you to proceed with it when all other subordinate spirits are gathered," said Gusyeon. Gusyeon's offer was quite reasonable, because if Yong-ho made Gusyeon his subordinate spirit, it would have an immediate effect on other subordinate spirits. "Okay then, I'll see you later in the afternoon." Yong-ho stood up after replying gently. Instead of standing up after him, Gusyeon laughed playfully and bowed to him with an exaggerated gesture. "Goodbye, master. See you then." Yong-ho also replied a bit hyperbolically like Gusyeon and left Uria's room. Chapter 245. Acceptance 2. Ophelia and Tigrius returned to Cadus Fortress last night, and Eligos was busy providing shelters for a dozen former masters of the Mammon family as well as almost 100 spirits of the arena. Yong-ho sat alone in the Demon King's room, leaving alone Kaiwan, who was just enjoying oversleeping openly, and Catalina struggling to wake up in the morning. As soon as he sat on the throne, he heard Lucius' voice. "Master, are you trying to access the virtual space of the dungeon market?" "Yes, because I have to meet Citri also. I have to buy lots of stuff to strengthen my forces." "Okay, yes, I will prepare it right away. Please close your eyes." Yong-ho buried himself a little more comfortably on the throne. As soon as he closed his eyes, he got connected to the virtual space of the dungeon market. The whole white world was the same as the one he saw yesterday. Faced with an empty world, he let his shoulders droop in a little disappointment. Apparently, Citri had not yet returned. But suddenly, the sky turned red. At the same time, the endlessly connected space was cut off. The white floor quickly shrunk to a dozen-meter-long rectangle, and all other spaces were filled with pitch darkness. It was a completely different reaction from what he felt yesterday. Recognition number 92, descendant of that man, emergency response. 17. As of now, all connections between the virtual space and the public network of the dungeon market will be blocked. Only access from the labyrinth of greed is allowed, Citri Yong-ho shouted instinctively. But he heard no reply from her. The letter of light also did not continue anymore. He felt ominous. It was clear that something had happened to Citri. The wording emergency made his heart pound rapidly. "Citri. Answer me, Citri." No matter how often he called her name loudly, it was useless. He tried to stay calm. Instead of screaming blindly, he thought about it. This space was special. He always met Citri here. According to the light text, Citri went to the trouble of disconnecting this space from the network of the dungeon market while keeping it connected with the labyrinth of greed. He recalled the memories of Citri, who he had seen the other day. The place where his memory had been reproduced was also this space. Citri sometimes appeared on the bed. She wasn't just acting, but she sometimes met him after waking up from a pretty deep sleep. So, he immediately realized that this space was not just a terminal. It was completely different from the place where other masters reached when accessing the virtual space of the dungeon market. In other words, it was Citri's personal space, as well as her secret place. He closed his eyes and concentrated. Strongly yearning for Citri, he activated the power of greed. The smoke of greed arose like a flame. Spreading out in all directions, it filled the space at once, and it soon aggregated to form several strands. Finally, they became one and led him to the way the air cracked, revealing a hidden secret door. The smoke of greed surrounded the door layer by layer. It shouted that there was something inside that he yearned for. He opened his eyes again and concentrated his mana. Breaking it halfway, he opened the secret door. Perhaps because the opponent was Yong-ho, the secret door let him in helplessly. So the place appeared. It was a space that was clearly reproduced on top of a virtual space, and therefore, it would have an impact on the real world. The smoke of greed moved once again. Permeating inside the secret door, it quickly wrapped up a huge red jewel in the middle of the room. It was the heart of the dungeon, connected with Citri's soul, her alter ego. He once again followed the guidance of greed. He put his hand on the heart of the dungeon, then spoke to it, as if he was dealing with Lucia. He tried to communicate with the heart of the dungeon. The heart of the dungeon, like the secret door, did not reject Yong-ho. It accepted him and told him what he wanted. And how long did it pass? Citri. He immediately got out of the virtual space, then sprang to his feet. He was occupied with only one thing at the moment. He had to save Citri. The subordinate spirits of the Mammon family gathered at the door control station in the space on the 9th floor of the Labyrinth of Greed. As soon as he got connected to Ophelia and Tigrius in Cadus Fortress by remote communication, Yong-ho immediately took out the main topic. There were two main things that Yong-ho learned through the heart of Citri's dungeon. First, Citri was dying now. Second, Citri's current location was somewhere in the north. Even through the heart of the dungeon, I could not find out her location accurately. I just know roughly where she is now. But you have to search the whole area to find. Her Yongho's tone was firm. Ophelia, who was looking closely at the map of light that Lucia displayed in the air, presented her opinion. The dungeon market has its own territories throughout the demon world. After the Six Kings recognized its influence, the headquarters of the dungeon market is located near the place you mentioned. It's a place where the 5 directors might have held a meeting. Ophelia raised her hand and pointed at the map. Lucia marked the area with a separate light. Yongho felt that it was the dungeon market's own territory. The headquarters of the dungeon market was located in a place where the territories of the Queen of Fury, the King of Gluttony, and the King of Lust bordered each other. Master, this is the location information of the doors of space currently available. Bright spots of light spread over the demon world. Its number decreased as they went beyond the blank area, but fortunately, there was a light near the headquarters of the dungeon market. It is the closest one inside the territory of the King of Lust. Although the door of space was not deep in the territory of the King of Lust, it was still within his territory. However, Yongho did not have any fear now. Even if it was located right next to the gate of the dungeon of the King of Lust, he was ready to carry out the operation. Chwiryong said in a low voice, "Master, you seem to be in a hurry. Citri won't die easily." But Yongho stared at him immediately, because he knew that Chwiryong had some feelings of love and hate towards Citri. Before he knew it, he looked at Chwiryong with a hostile expression. However, Chwiryong dealt with him casually, as usual. Soon Yongho let out a sigh first. He admitted that he was excited at the moment, so he tried to calm down. Tigrius, watching them quietly, said in a calm voice, "I think it's also important to understand why this situation happened. Citri is one of the 5 directors of the dungeon market, as well as the Queen of Sloth. So, it is very unusual and grave that she was on the verge of dying and neglected somewhere in the north." "You mean this is an event involving the directors or even a king?" Chwiryong added. As Armin said, she was the Queen of Sloth. Even if she suffered an irreparable injury, it was impossible for her to plunge in such a dangerous situation at the attack of ordinary men. "That doesn't matter," Yongho cut off Chwiryong. "If the opponent drove Citri into such a precarious situation, he must be very strong." But that didn't really matter to Yongho. The only thing that matters at this point is the fact that we are going to save Citri. Lucia mark the position of the door of space once again. "Okay, Master." Apparently influenced by Yongho's mood, Lucia responded in a rather hard tone and hurriedly followed his order. He continued to order, "As you can see, the territory of the King of Lust is the closest to the door of space. Let me start exploring from there." He was urgent. He was nervous. He was definitely getting excited. However, it did not mean that he could not make a correct judgment. For everything except for Citri, he spoke and acted based on his rationale. It is unreasonable to fly Tiamat directly across the territories of the King of Gluttony and the King of Lust. The invisible air barriers that the kings might have laid out in the sky pose a threat, but the bigger problem is our flying time. Therefore, instead of sending large troops through the flying vehicle, we are going to use the door of space. After infiltrating the territory of the King of Lust with a small elite force, we are going to search for Citri. Yongho paused for a moment and looked at Salami and Bucephalas standing nervously behind the subordinate spirits. Unlike the usual meetings where they were absent, he had them attend at this time for this reason. Salami, who evolved into a fire elemental dragon, could adjust his size to some extent thanks to his attribute as a spirit. If he could stretch his body as much as possible, he could carry more than 4 on his back. Since we have to put priority on our mobility, all of us can't go. Moreover, we have to take into account how often we can use the door of space. So, let me call the names who will go with me. It was because of the limits to the daily use of the door of space that Ophelia and Tigrius attended the conference via long-distance communication, instead of coming directly to the Labyrinth of Greed. They could move through the space door control station only twice a day. Ophelia and Tigrius could not come. Yongho looked at the rest of the subordinate spirits. Chwiryong, Skathak, Chwiryong, Catalina, Skull. Chapter 246, Acceptance 3. He smiled slightly at Gushin. So, with the help of Lucia, he registered Gushin as his subordinate spirit. He was the 8th subordinate spirit of his. Whenever they were added as his subordinate spirits one by one, the effect of their registration was reduced, but this time it was none other than Gusion. Yong-ho felt an enormous power, like Gusion was joining him. He closed his eyes before he knew it and opened his horns. All his subordinate spirits did the same thing. With them opening up their horns fully, they felt the addition of a new power. In particular, the changes in Gusion and Catalina were significant. Mana was released from Gusion's, two horns that looked like a bull's. Gusion recovered some of the mana he had lost when Mammon died. Catalina's change was even more dramatic. Struggling in extreme pleasure and pain, she screamed, hugging her shoulders. White light was glaring in her eyes, and soon new horns grew through her white hair. Like Kaiwan, she overcame the limits and obtained the sixth horn. Other subordinate spirits also felt their strength increase. Yong-ho let out a long breath to control his mana. After controlling not only his, but also other subordinate spirits' mana, he removed his hand from Gusion's shoulder. Kaiwan quickly supported Catalina. There was a pleasant smile on her face covered with cold sweat. Normally, Yong-ho would have taken care of Catalina and Kaiwan, but he could not, for now. He was so impatient at the moment. After asking Skathach to heal the two women, he ordered Lucia to activate the Door of Space. Magnadon, the Wizard of Mammon, died. However, his legacy, the Door of Space, played its part even at this moment. Let's go. Yong-ho took the lead and stepped into the Door of Space. Kaiwan looked at him with some anxious expression, but soon followed him with Catalina. After Gusion, Skathach, Salami, and Bucephalus went in, Skull tapped his chest, looking at Eligos as if to tell him not to worry. After smiling at him cheerfully, he finally entered the Door of Space. Let alone, Eligos closed the Door of Space. He prayed for Yong-ho's safety. There were many gorges and mountains in the land of the King of Lust. The stiff cliffs and rocky mountains had long served as a natural fortress to protect the king's territory. The Door of Space was inside the collapsed cave. The entrance was cut off from the outside because of the large stones clogged up, which fortunately helped maintain the Door of Space for over 1,000 years. Armin drove out the darkness by emitting only light from the flames of the Red Lotus. Gusion punched the rocks lightly to turn them into powder, while Skathach solidified the collapsed sites with the moisture she pulled up from the basement. She took the measure to prevent the cave from collapsing again. Yong-ho could escape the cave within minutes of his arrival, thanks to the three subordinate spirits' excellent cooperation. A cold northern wind blew through the canyon. Facing the huge cliff in front of her, Kaiwan looked around with anxious eyes. She could sense the scent of the swordblade ogres, the wild monsters living in a group in the cold wind. If Citri was really dying, even those monsters would be dangerous. But the gorge was too wide for Yong-ho and his party to search for Citri right away. He couldn't figure out where and how to search for her. Yong-ho swallowed, at a loss of what to do. Amon whispered to him in flames, "Master, yearn for Citri. Maximize the possessiveness and bring out the power of greed." The only thing Yong-ho could rely on was to follow his desire for greed. However, the situation was different in the case of Catalina and Kaiwan. Now Yong-ho's possession through their registration as his subordinate spirits, he had never had any desire for possessing Citri. He closed his eyes and thought about Citri. He thought about her when he held her in his arms and when he was held in her arms. That was clearly different from his possession. However, his greed did not forsake his desire. The energy of his greed that he was releasing at full blast engulfed everything around him, and soon it became one and led him the way. It wasn't too far. She was surprisingly close to where he was. Salami. The moment Yong-ho ordered Salami, he spread his wings. After increasing his body as much as possible, he lay flat and let them get on it. Yong-ho, Kaiwan, Gusion, and Skathach climbed on it, and Salami flew without hesitation. Bucephalus, carrying Skull, followed. Catalina spread her wings of shadow and soared into the sky. Salami was flying low, so he could not be detected by the air barrier. Salami flew with all his might, and Bucephalus ran not only on the ground, but also on the walls of the canyon without any fear. Catalina flew ahead of Salami and watched out for the ground. And at one moment, Catalina flew toward the ground as if she was falling. Yong-ho felt his heart beating fast. He felt it when he met the Queen of Fury or the King of Gluttony. But his feelings were different this time. There were many ogres on the ground with blade-like protrusions on their bodies. They were hostile to Catalina, who suddenly appeared, but only briefly. The appearance of Skull and Bucephalus alone frightened them. Faced with Skull's glaring eyes, they got frightened and fled in chaos. Salami landed safely on the ground. Jumping on the ground in a hurry, he moved his gaze following the smoke of greed. There was something deep in the pile of rocks piled up randomly. There was nothing clearly visible because of something like a magical power, but he could feel it. His heart was pounding more and more. The power of sloth. After withdrawing the power of greed, he moved forward. Then he burned the barrier of sloth with the power of greed. At the moment, the space was twisted as if a haze was rising. A couple of human figures were seen through the pile of rocks. Citri. It was Skathak who shouted at her. She rushed to the pile of rocks. Then she held her breath, looking down at the two bloody women. It was Citri holding a blonde, black-winged woman. As she was 1,000 years ago, she was always beautiful, even though she was covered with blood. Skathak unwittingly shed tears. Citri was not the subject of resentment toward her. She was her precious colleague who had gotten out of the battlefield 1,000 years ago. Even though she just took a glimpse of Citri, she was choked up with emotions. Even before wiping her tears, Skathak filled her hands with vitality. She then breathed it into Citri and Samael. Both of you are still alive. You're very weak, but it's okay. I'll never let you die because I'm here, said Skathak. Yong-ho let out a sigh of relief, holding back the urge to hug Citri right away. She was in better shape than he was worried. Samael, the one held in Citri's arms, was obviously Samael, the fastest wing and one of the 5 directors of the dungeon market. Given that not only Citri, but also Samael was put in a precarious situation, something really big must have happened at the dungeon market. Is there a rebellion inside the dungeon market? The dungeon market was operating normally at this moment. Actually, Yong-ho had one of the masters in the eastern area to buy an item there and confirm their operation. Be it an internal uprising or an external enemy, it was obviously a very covert attack. If there had been a massive attack, they could not have run the market normally as if nothing had happened. He stopped thinking. After getting next to Skathak, he quietly held her hand. The Queen of Sloth. When all the other kings betrayed Mammon, she stayed with him until the very end. Citri. He could not hear her reply. But Skathak's healing efforts brought color to her pale face. Skathak signaled to him with a glance. He carefully held Citri while Gusion held Samael. The Shus gave first aid to them. I need to heal them properly in the Garden of Life. Yong-ho nodded. After tightening his arms holding Citri, he headed to Salami. They hastily left the place. The dungeon of the King of Envy was the same as yesterday. Nothing changed, except the fact that its owner changed. The throne of the King of Envy. The King of Pride sat there, which belonged to the King of Envy for more than 1,000 years. The King of Pride felt deep satisfaction. The power of envy surging deep down delighted him. All the more Leviathan, the King of Envy, was dead. However, his forces were still fighting the forces of the King of Pride. Of course, they were not fighting out of loyalty to their late king. Most of them were unaware of the fact that their king was dead. And, interestingly, the forces of the King of Pride didn't know it. Either intelligence was power. Over time, it would be inevitable for them to learn that the King of Envy had died and that the dungeon market had been taken over by the King of Pride. If that was the case, the King of Pride needed to delay it as long as possible. Ignorance was always a fatal weakness. The King of Lust was actually the King of Pride himself. The godly energy of lust that he had around his waist was that of envy, not lust, proved it. The King of Pride closed his eyes and counted the numbers. He checked what he missed in his clan. First, the King of Sloth. He preferred Citri, who revealed herself as the specific enemy, to the Queen of Sloth that didn't appear, hiding somewhere. It was surprising to him that she was the Queen of Sloth, but according to the report of Bifrons, Citri at the moment was badly wounded. By now she was on the verge of dying. The Queen of Fury was nothing but a little kid. She didn't know how to fight properly, and ran wild on the battlefield, saying that she would save her subordinates. As a woman who didn't know the fact that she was the queen, she couldn't be a match for him. Although he didn't like it very much, the King of Violence was powerful. Moreover, it was highly likely that the King of Violence killed the King of Gluttony, though he assumed it was a possibility for now. If he had obtained the godly energy of fury, as well as that of gluttony, he must have changed into a formidable enemy by now. But even so, the king of violence would have two different sins. In other words, the king of violence and the queen of fury were not united into one. They couldn't do anything with such half-baked cooperation. There was a reason why dragons were called the arrogant nickname Dragon Lord. Moreover, the Queen of Sloth had no connection with the other two kings, the three kings who had to confront the King of Pride. They existed as separate entities with no central figure to lead them. Then what should he do? His answer was simple. The King of Pride drew a line on the map of the demon world that came to his mind. He ordered the soul of his dungeon to deliver a message to the camp of the King of Gluttony. The sun had set, and the night came. On the darkest night, without even a star, the King of Gluttony's army began to move. They were marching into the west, to the territory of the Queen of Fury. Comment 0, comment V003 left. Chapter 247. Fury 1. The sky was blue and dark. There was still a lot of time left until it was dawn. The central temple, one of the sacred places of the 8 clans, was as quiet as always. It was even more so because there was no strong wind blowing because of the terrain where the temple was located. It was quiet. Since everyone was asleep, there was supposed to be no sound at all, let alone footsteps, but not today. Lots of people went back and forth, raising their voices. Among them was Chwiryong, the nanny as well as the bodyguard of the Queen of Fury. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty," Chwiryong shouted, who jumped into her room forcefully as if to destroy it. Her behavior was very rude, given that the one staying in this room was not only the chieftain of the Gandharva clan, but also the Queen of Fury. But Chwiryong didn't care at all. She didn't act arrogantly just because she was the Queen's closest aide. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty, wake up now, Your Majesty." She shook the Queen's shoulders violently with her big hand. The Queen, who was drooping on the big bed, opened her eyes wide open and talked nonsense, half awake. "I didn't doze. No, I didn't nod off. Yes, I did so. Oops, sorry, Prince Antoniox, don't be upset." She was about to cry at the end of her words. It seemed that Mahora, who was a teacher of etiquette to her, saw Antoniox in her dream. Chwiryong grew even more urgent. Once again, she shook the Queen's shoulders and shouted, "Your Majesty, a terrible thing has happened. Wake up, Chwiryong." The Queen finally spoke, blinking her eyes. Her voice was very weak since she usually slept late in the morning. Chwiryong shouted, holding her shoulders. "It's a war. The army of the King of Gluttony has crossed the border. Battles are currently underway along the eastern border." The Queen suddenly came to her senses. As soon as the Queen got up from her bed suddenly, Chwiryong said, picking up the clothes on the bed, "A meeting of the representatives of the 8 clans was called. As they are coming to the conference room, you have to hurry up." She was not in the movable dungeon Vimana, but the temple of the 8 clans. Besides, the representatives of the 8 clans were also in the same place because of a series of meetings every day. She asked Chwiryong instinctively, "How big is their invasion? Is it big enough to require the convening of the representative of the 8 clans? It's not clear yet, but it looks like an all-out war." It was already a few months ago that the Queen of Fury and the King of Gluttony deployed their own troops on the border areas. Because of this, their invasion and defense against each other was quick. The Queen of Fury slapped herself on the cheek with both hands. After completely waking up, she and Chwiryong left the room. She was dressed in baggy pajamas, but she had no time to change her clothes leisurely. More than half of the heads of the 8 clans already gathered in the conference room, located in the center of the temple. Some of them were in pajamas like the Queen, others with their hair disheveled. The Queen sat on her seat, reserved for the head of the Gandharva clan. If she could have her way, she wanted to rush to the battlefield right now, but she had to endure it. In some cases, an all-out war could take place, so even if she was impatient, she needed to review and discuss the matter with them. She felt every minute, every second was so long. It took more than a few minutes for all the representatives to gather, and it took another more minutes for them to receive the briefing from those who attended the meeting to brief them about the war status on the battlefield. The Queen of Fury clenched her teeth. The situation was worse than she thought. He had seen that the King of Gluttony was thinking of an all-out war. He was striking the eastern front, by mobilizing large troops, which could not even be compared to the armed clashes they had exchanged several times so far. It seems that he mobilized even those troops that he had concentrated to confront the King of Lust. He was also moving the troops confronting the Dragon Legion dispatched by the King of Violence. He must be crazy. Somebody cursed at the king. The Queen of Fury also agreed. If he had not cursed, she would have done so. The King of Gluttony's attack was like a reckless warmonger. Aside from his troops deployed to check the King of Lust, how could he move the troops from the front line where they were pitted against the Dragon Legion? Was he going to do lance charging without taking into account the consequences? What about the King of Gluttony? Did you find out his whereabouts? Mahabharata, the head of the Deva clan, asked. A young Maharaja who attended the meeting to brief them about the war status replied hastily, "He is not seen anywhere at the moment. The man who is spearheading the attack is Judy Ceres, the demon king of Earthquake, who was in charge of the Eastern Front. He was allegedly seen commanding his troops on the battlefield. Even at this moment, the battle was underway. The Queen of Fury once again suppressed her feelings. She quickly reviewed all the intelligence available and checked out the situation. The reason the Queen of Fury planned to attack the King of Gluttony was because of the alliance with the Master of the House of Mammon, as well as the assistance of the King of Violence. On the other hand, the King of Gluttony had no alliance. Rather, the King of Gluttony was confronting not only the Queen, but also the King of Violence. So, it was unreasonable for him to strike first in this situation. If that was the case, what happened? Did the King of Gluttony form an alliance that she was not aware of, or did he join hands with the King of Lust? She thought that the absence of the King of Gluttony for more than a month was related to his efforts to form an alliance behind the scenes. But she kept thinking he didn't do it because such activities never befitted the king, that she used to know what happened to the King of Lust's forces. Why are they moving? At that moment, Kavilaka, the head of the Karvinka clan, asked the young Maharaja with her hair and feathers turned white. She was calm as always. As if impressed by her serenity, the young Maharaja replied calmly, "The King of Lust has never shown any sign of moving. According to the reports of our scouts there, the masters under the command of the king are also showing no movement at all. More than half the scouts of the 8 clans were the Karvinka clan, who could freely roam the sky. It was almost impossible for the king to move a large-scale military force without avoiding their watch, who could look very far down the sky. Actually, the King of Lust did not move. It was clear that his army did not join the King of Gluttony. The Queen of Fury stopped thinking. It was meaningless for her to think further. She got up from her seat and drew everyone's attention. Let me tell you this as the Queen of the 8 clans, not as the head of the Dhritarashtra clan. I'm going to join our forces in the Eastern Front from now on and confront the King of Gluttony's forces." The King of Gluttony was still missing. However, his troops were constantly gathering in the Eastern Front. The Eastern Front, where the war was currently going on, was of great strategic value because it was not far from the border that shared the territory of the King of Lust. Aside from the personality of the Queen of Fury, the Eastern battlefield was worthwhile for any king because of its strategic value. Let me ask for the assistance of the King of Violence and the House of Mammon. I would like to enlist your full support from the rear. She already revealed at the meeting yesterday that she formed an alliance with the Mammon family as well as the King of Violence. She took a deep breath, then looked at the head of the Dragon clan and the head of the Deva clan. As always, I'm going to assume the worst scenario. Both of you, please defend the northern area like before. We take your order. Sugura, the head of the Dragon clan, and Asterio, the head of the Deva clan, paid their respect to the Queen of Fury. Like she said a moment ago, she was giving them an order not as the head of her Gandharva clan, but as the Queen of the 8 clans. Head of the Garura clan, dispatch a messenger to the King of Violence Gardamundi. Once again, go to the House of Mammon and ask for emergency assistance. Biruyupacha, the head of the Garura clan and Gardamundi's father, also showed due manners to her and followed her order. Although Gardamundi tried to protect the queen who was going on an expedition to the Eastern Front, she could not dare to resist her order in a public meeting like this, so she also accepted the queen's order politely. After revealing her war plan like that, the Queen of Fury said, "It must be an unexpected attack. but we have been preparing for this kind of war. As always, I think we can overcome this crisis wisely." Their first meeting was finally over. The queen hurried out of the conference hall and climbed on the back of Astra, a huge beast, with her bodyguards. She cleaned her body and armed herself with weapons on Astra's back. As large as a fully grown ancient dragon, Astra spread its iridescent wings. Then it immediately soared high in the sky and headed east. The sun was rising. The Queen of Fury grabbed the godly energy of gluttony. Chapter 247. Fury 1. The sky was blue and dark. There was still a lot of time left until it was dawn. The central temple, one of the sacred places of the 8 clans, was as quiet as always. It was even more so because there was no strong wind blowing because of the terrain where the temple was located. It was quiet. Since everyone was asleep, there was supposed to be no sound at all, let alone footsteps. But not today. Lots of people went back and forth, raising their voices. Among them was Chwiryong, the nanny as well as the bodyguard of the Queen of Fury. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty," Chwiryong shouted, who jumped into her room forcefully as if to destroy it. Her behavior was very rude, given that the one staying in this room was not only the chieftain of the Gandharva clan, but also the Queen of Fury. But Chwiryong didn't care at all. She didn't act arrogantly just because she was the queen's closest aide. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty, wake up now, Your Majesty." She shook the queen's shoulders violently with her big hand. The queen, who was drooping on the big bed, opened her eyes wide open and talked nonsense, half awake. "Ah, I didn't doze. No, I didn't nod off. Yes, I did so. Oops, I'm sorry, Prince Antoniox. Don't be upset." She was about to cry at the end of her words. It seemed that Mahora, who was a teacher of etiquette to her, saw Antoniox in her dream. Chwiryong grew even more urgent. Once again, she shook the queen's shoulders and shouted, "Your Majesty, a terrible thing has happened. Wake up, Chwiryong." The queen finally spoke, blinking her eyes. Her voice was very weak since she usually slept late in the morning. Chwiryong shouted, holding her shoulders, "It's a war. The army of the King of Gluttony has crossed the border. Battles are currently underway along the eastern border." The queen suddenly came to her senses. As soon as the queen got up from her bed suddenly, Chwiryong said, picking up the clothes on the bed, "A meeting of the representatives of the 8 clans was called. As they are coming to the conference room, you have to hurry up." She was not in the movable dungeon, Vamana, but the temple of the 8 clans. Besides, the representatives of the 8 clans were also in the same place because of a series of meetings every day. She asked Chwiryong instinctively, "How big is their invasion? Is it big enough to require the convening of the representative of the 8 clans? It's not clear yet, but it looks like an all-out war." It was already a few months ago that the Queen of Fury and the King of Gluttony deployed their own troops on the border areas. Because of this, their invasion and defense against each other was quick. The Queen of Fury slapped herself on the cheek with both hands. After completely waking up, she and Chwiryong left the room. She was dressed in baggy pajamas, but she had no time to change her clothes leisurely. More than half of the heads of the 8 clans already gathered in the conference room located in the center of the temple. Some of them were in pajamas like the queen, others with their hair disheveled. The queen sat on her seat, reserved for the head of the Gandharva clan. If she could have her way, she wanted to rush to the battlefield right now, but she had to endure it. In some cases, an all-out war could take place. So even if she was impatient, she needed to review and discuss the matter with them. She felt every minute, every second was so long. It took more than a few minutes for all the representatives to gather, and it took another more minutes for them to receive the briefing from those who attended the meeting to brief them about the war status on the battlefield. The Queen of Fury clenched her teeth. The situation was worse than she thought. It seemed that the King of Gluttony was thinking of an all-out war. He was striking the Eastern Front by mobilizing large troops, which could not even be compared to the armed clashes they had exchanged several times so far. It seems that he mobilized even those troops that he had concentrated to confront the King of Lust. He was also moving the troops confronting the Dragon Legion dispatched by the King of Violence. He must be crazy. Somebody cursed at the king. The Queen of Fury also agreed. If he had not cursed, she would have done so. The King of Gluttonous attack was like a reckless warmonger. Aside from his troops deployed to check the King of Lust, how could he move the troops from the front line where they were pitted against the Dragon Legion? Was he going to do lance charging without taking into account the consequences? What about the King of Gluttony? Did you find out his whereabouts? Mahabharata, the head of the Deva clan, asked. A young Maharaja who attended the meeting to brief them about the war status replied hastily. He is not seen anywhere at the moment. The man who is spearheading the attack is Judicaris, the demon king of Earthquake, who was in charge of the Eastern Front. He was allegedly seen commanding his troops on the battlefield. Even at this moment, the battle was underway. The Queen of Fury once again suppressed her feelings. She quickly reviewed all the intelligence available and checked out the situation. The reason the Queen of Fury planned to attack the King of Gluttony was because of the alliance with the Master of the House of Mammon as well as the assistance of the King of Violence. On the other hand, the King of Gluttony had no alliance. Rather, the King of Gluttony was confronting not only the Queen, but also the King of Violence. So, it was unreasonable for him to strike first in this situation. If that was the case, what happened? Did the King of Gluttony form an alliance that she was not aware of, or did he join hands with the King of Lust? She thought that the absence of the King of Gluttony for more than a month was related to his efforts to form an alliance behind the scenes, but she kept thinking he didn't do it because such activities never befitted the king, that she used to know what happened to the King of Lust's forces. Why are they moving? At that moment, Kavalaka, the head of the Karvinka clan, asked the young Maharaja. With her hair and feathers turned white, she was calm as always. As if impressed by her serenity, the young Maharaja replied calmly, "The King of Lust has never shown any sign of moving. According to the reports of our scouts there, the masters under the command of the king are also showing no movement at all. More than half the scouts of the 8 clans were the Karvinka clan, who could freely roam the sky. It was almost impossible for the king to move a large-scale military force without avoiding their watch, who could look very far down the sky. Actually, the King of Lust did not move. It was clear that his army did not join the King of Gluttony. The Queen of Fury stopped thinking. It was meaningless for her to think further. She got up from her seat and drew everyone's attention. Let me tell you this as the Queen of the 8 clans, not as the head of the Dhritarashtra clan. I'm going to join our forces in the Eastern Front from now on and confront the King of Gluttony's forces." The King of Gluttony was still missing. However, his troops were constantly gathering in the Eastern Front. The Eastern Front, where the war was currently going on, was of great strategic value because it was not far from the border that shared the territory of the King of Lust. Aside from the personality of the Queen of Fury, the Eastern battlefield was worthwhile for any king because of its strategic value. Let me ask for the assistance of the King of Violence and the House of Mammon. I would like to enlist your full support from the rear. She already revealed at the meeting yesterday that she formed an alliance with the Mammon family as well as the King of Violence. She took a deep breath, then looked at the head of the Dragon clan and the head of the Deva clan. As always, I'm going to assume the worst scenario. Both of you, please defend the northern area like before. We take your order. Sugura, the head of the Dragon clan, and Asterio, the head of the Deva clan, paid their respect to the Queen of Fury. Like she said a moment ago, she was giving them an order, not as the head of her Gandharva clan, but as the Queen of the 8 clans. Head of the Garura clan, dispatch a messenger to the King of Violence Gardamundi. Once again, go to the House of Mammon and ask for emergency assistance. Biryapacha, the head of the Garura clan and Gardamundi's father, also showed due manners to her and followed her order. Although Gardamundi tried to protect the queen who was going on an expedition to the Eastern Front, she could not dare to resist her order in a public meeting like this, so she also accepted the queen's order politely. After revealing her war plan like that, the Queen of Fury said, "It must be an unexpected attack, but we have been preparing for this kind of war. As always, I think we can overcome this crisis wisely." Their first meeting was finally over. The queen hurried out of the conference hall and climbed on the back of Astra, a huge beast, with her bodyguards. She cleaned her body and armed herself with weapons on Astra's back. As large as a fully grown ancient dragon, Astra spread its iridescent wings. Then it immediately soared high in the sky and headed east. The sun was rising. The Queen of Fury grabbed the godly energy of Gluttony. Chapter 248, Fury 2. Time passed without a pause. Nearly a day had already passed since Yong-ho saved Sitri and Samael. Yong-ho looked at the mansion of Skachak with a nervous expression. He tried to sleep for a moment at night, but he couldn't because he was so worried. He felt something strange about Sitri this time. Of course, he always thought of her as a special woman, but little did he think she meant a lot to him like this. In his mind, she was as important as Catalina and Kaiwan. He closed his eyes tightly. Then he erased the old memories that kept coming to his mind. Back then, it was a different story. There was no more bereavement now. "They are coming out," Kaiwan shouted. He quickly opened his eyes and looked straight ahead. Like Kaiwan said, Skathak and Eustia were leaving the mansion with their faces exhausted. By keeping his promise to take Guxian here, Yong-ho could become the true owner of Skathak. Completely lifted from the blockade that bound her for more than 1,000 years, Skathak could move freely outside the mansion. It was the same for Eustia. After having recognized Yong-ho as the new master of the Mammon family from the moment she met him, she could be lifted from her confinement to the central library by re-registering as a general dungeon spirit of the Mammon family. They didn't have any sleep throughout the night because they focused on healing Sitri and Samael, who were seriously wounded. Yong-ho felt sorry for their exhaustion. However, he couldn't even comfort them by praising their efforts. As soon as he saw them, he asked about Citra's health instinctively. Skathash let down her shoulders a bit and responded in a rather gloomy tone. "She has survived, fortunately. It seems that she was wounded deeply in her intestines, but it's not severe enough to not be cured. But there is some problem with her soul." "Her soul?" Skathak nodded. She said, looking at the flames of the red lotus that already arose before she knew it. As Ayaman said, that must have something to do with what happened on that day. How can I describe Citra's condition? It's like a crack in one corner of a glass bottle. The crack grew bigger because she used the power of sin excessively in such a condition. Yong-ho felt ominous to hear that. As if she could not stand it, Kaiwan cut in suddenly. "Can't you heal her even with the power of evolution?" In fact, he had healed quite a few injuries with the power of evolution so far. Since Catalina not only felt the power herself, but also witnessed the rebirth of Goblin Yon, who was on the verge of dying, she looked at him with anticipation. But Skathak shook her head. Eustia said, "Although the power of evolution is certainly very powerful, I don't think he can cure her soul with it. But don't worry too much. As Skathak said already, she has survived. Besides, she is the Queen of Sloth. As long as she regains her consciousness, she will be able to take care of her own wounds." Catalina curled her lips, and Kaiwan sighed. Skathash continued, "In the case of Samael, her injuries are much more severe, but because she was physically wounded, curing her is rather easy. I think she will recover her consciousness today or tomorrow." Yong-ho could restore Samael at once with the power of evolution, but that was possible only when she could be available for evolution. Even if Samael became a dungeon spirit of the Mammon family, it would take a considerable amount of time for her to gain evolution. EXP enough for evolution. Moreover, she was one of the 5 directors who were allegedly on par with the kings in terms of strength, although she had none of the 7 deadly sins and godly energy. Maybe she needed to gain evolution, EXP, comparable to that of Amon or Guxion. Yong-ho breathed out long. He'd only seen her face only a few times, but that didn't mean that he was not worried about Samael. What happened at the dungeon market? While Skathak and Eustia were concentrating on treating Sitri and Samael, Yong-ho ordered the masters under his command to stop trading with the dungeon market. He didn't make any big announcement about the suspension of all trading forever. He just ordered them to stop buying any stuff at the dungeon market for the time being. Sitri Yong-ho once again suppressed his nervousness. Now that Sitri and Samael were not in danger of losing their lives, all he had to do was to wait for them to regain their consciousness. Then he would be able to know exactly what happened at the dungeon market. "Leave Sitri to me, and take some good rest. You look really haggard." Skathak asked Yong-ho to take a rest, but he could not say anything because he was sorry. In fact, it was Skathak who was exhausted most. Right at that moment, Lucia's voice was heard by everyone, not just Yong-ho. "Master Gardamundi has come back. It seems she has a very urgent business." Gardamundi, who visited the house of Mammon only 2 days ago, visited again. It was very unusual that she came back. Instead of responding at all, Yong-ho headed straight to the reception room. Accompanied by Kaiwan and Catalina Astra, the highest flying wild bird, flew 10,000 miles a day. Her iridescent wings, shimmering in the sunlight, shattered the clouds, and her giant body was flying ahead of the wind. The Queen of Fury sat on Astra's back and meditated. She calmed down her burning determination to fight with a sense of composure. Her abundant chest moved up and down as she breathed long. Although she was going to war, the queen was still lightly dressed. Her white-skinned long arms and legs were revealed, and only her thin white clothes fluttered over her slender figure. But she was much more colorful than usual. The godly energy of gluttony, in the shape of a waistband, wrapped around her thin and elastic waist. She wore gold jewelry on her ankles as well as her wrists. All of them were armed with a mysterious power. Her bodyguards lining up behind her back were also armed like her. They wore pure white clothes and wore gold coats on their arms and legs. The only one wearing armor was Chwiryong of the Yakasha clan. There was no darkness under the sun that rose completely. The intangible walls spreading on Astra's back broke the violent wind, and various scent was transmitted from the fragments of the wind. Chwiryong did not miss the smell of blood mixed with the wind. The battlefield was not far. The Queen of Fury slowly opened her eyes. She got up and looked down at the ground. At least tens of thousands of soldiers were entangled with each other while fighting. Luxurious and glamorous magic engulfed the battlefield, and huge spirits such as mountain giants and cyclops ran wildly in the battlefield. Strictly speaking, the forces of the Queen of Fury were on the defensive. The number of the King of Gluttony's troops was almost twice as the Queen's forces. The Queen changed the way she breathed. She clenched her fists tightly. In a quiet voice, she ordered, "Astra." Astra cried loudly and slowed down her flying speed. Her wild crying swept through the ground, carried by the wind. The fighting troops on the battlefield looked up at the sky. The Queen's forces, as well as the King of Gluttony's troops, looked at the same time. The Queen of Fury closed her eyes. Astra twisted her body in the air, and the Queen and her bodyguards left their bodies to gravity for a free fall. Naturally, they flew toward the ground. The wind was strong. They were approaching the ground at a terrific speed, while Astra was fading away into the sky. The Queen opened her eyes and glared at the ground. She saw and heard a lot of things there. She opened her arms like wings. At the same time, she activated the power of her golden robes and fully released her thruster energy that she'd been suppressing until now. The sky flashed with flashes of light. It seemed as if starlight was pouring into the red sky. Each of her bodyguards was disguised as a translucent thrust giant. It was an embodiment of a thrust energy developed by the Ashura clan, the most outstanding fighting race among the 8 clans, and the brightest light among them was that of the Queen of Fury. A golden light shone again from her, disguised as a red thrust energy giant. An enormous light poured out from the godly energy of gluttony, a lump of brigada. Every soldier on the battlefield staring at the sky lost their vision for a moment. The Queen of Fury, engulfed in a light as bright as the sun, pulled her clenched fists. She looked at the ground, not the King of Gluttony's forces, then punched it with her fist, shouting loudly. The light disappeared. Instead, a massive explosion wave swept the battlefield. The ground split apart the moment she punched it hard. It was like a giant was cracking the whole earth. The moment she punched the ground, dozens of dungeon spirits nearby were killed by the impact of her punch, and the resulting earthquake shook the army of the King of Gluttony, sending hundreds of them off into the giant cracks or breaking them down on the ground. This time, meteor showers rained down on them endlessly. Her bodyguards, who were disguised as the thrust energy giants like the Queen, landed on the ground quickly, causing a giant shockwave across the battlefield. The Queen of Fury stood up, stretching her knees. While flying down, she remembered what she saw on the ground. Then she released all the mana that she had received from the godly energy of gluttony, but also Regada. She was holding a giant axe almost the size of a human in the right hand of the thrust engine, giant with a ghostly face. "Pour out, lightning." As soon as she shouted, lightning struck from the dry sky. Moreover, not one, but several lightning struck simultaneously, A terrifying lightning storm swept the ground. All the soldiers on the battlefield were forced to look at the Queen of Fury because of her terrifying presence. Tens of thousands of eyes were like arrows. The sudden silence was even terrifying. Face them all. The Queen of Fury raised her fists high. Standing proudly among tens of thousands of troops, she pointed at herself. "Look at me. Who do you think I am?" Her voice was as deafening as lightning. The sound of her thunderous shouting, which nobody believed could have come from the slender queen, overwhelmed them. The Queen of Fury knew how to fight. The high morale of the troops on the battlefield, where tens of thousands of troops fought, worked a miracle. Stand up, warriors of the 8 clans. Ooh, oh, 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 The silence broke at the crying of the Queen of Fury. The atmosphere of the battlefield itself changed when the Queen's forces, which were on the defensive, shouted all at once. The thunderous shouting of the tens of thousands of troops shook the heaven and earth. It heralded the arrival of their queen. Not only the recruits who first fought on the battlefield, but also the veterans who had already fought numerous battles, knew the queen. Dhritarashtra, the Queen of Fury, always stood at the forefront. When she was with her troops, they were never defeated. As long as they trust her, their morale could not be higher. The Queen of Fury stood at the forefront again. Just as the Queen's army knew it, the forces of the King of Gluttony also knew it. Chapter 249, Fury 3. After meeting Gardamundi, Yong-ho fell into confusion once again. He heard from her that the army of the King of Gluttony mounted the first strike against the forces of the Queen of Fury. Objectively speaking, their attack was unthinkable, which was what Yong-ho never expected. The King of Gluttony was dead. If so, who in the world moved the king's army? The king's successor? The warlords who replaced the kings? 10 warriors? Either way, it was very strange. The King of Gluttony's invasion was like a suicidal action. Who dared to challenge the Queen of Fury? Didn't they care about Yong-ho or the King of Violence at all? Oh, master of the Mammon family, king of the unclaimed territory. Yong-ho suddenly raised his head at Gardamundi's call. She was looking straight at him. Although she was usually playful and lively, she was different now. She was extremely tense. "Are you hiding something?" Gardamundi asked. She asked calmly, but it looked like she was questioning him. Chwiryong and Catalina, who were standing behind his back, reacted at the same time. Their sharp gaze at her seemed to rip her apart at any moment. However, Gardamundi looked only at Yong-ho without moving at all. He was agonizing, faced with her. He had an alliance with the Queen of Fury. She was a good ally who would join hands with him to conquer the North in the future. If so, wasn't it okay to tell her the truth? If he shared the intelligence with the Queen, wasn't it possible to solve the current mystery by sharing information with each other? But he couldn't make the decision on impulse. If something went wrong, their alliance could be affected. Even if he decided to tell the truth, he needed to tell it directly to the Queen of Fury, not Gardamundi. Yong-ho opened his mouth. Gardamundi looked at him more sharply. At that moment, Lucia shouted, "Master, Samael has regained consciousness." He sprang to his feet suddenly. As Lucia's voice was only delivered to Yong-ho and his subordinate spirits, Gardamundi became even more suspicious. "I have an urgent message from the soul of the dungeon. Please wait for a moment." After speaking to her immediately, he closed his eyes. When he strengthened his connection with Lucia, he could bring out a video. It showed the inside of Scathach's mansion, Karot. Karot? No. As soon as she opened her eyes, Samael screamed and twisted her body. She must have recalled the shock when her subordinate spirits were massacred. Scathach quickly hugged her and breathed warm vitality into her, holding her in her arms. Samael cried out loud. Then she was drooping. She then raised her head again. She looked at Scathach blankly. Obviously, she was far from normal. It seemed that it was difficult for him to get any meaningful information from her right now. But it was too early for him to give up. Eustia grabbed Samael's other hand. Then Eustia injected mental magic into her body with warmth, and Scathach blew vitality into her again. Samael was not an ordinary woman. As the head of the Harpy clan, she was strong enough to be one of the 5 directors. And her strength wasn't limited to her mana or physical body. Instead of healing Samael's emotional wounds, Eustia gave her a strong stimulus to shake up her mind. Quiet Samael suddenly clenched her teeth. She cried again and gasped for breath. Then she looked around, as if she came to her senses. Finally, Madame Citri was soaking her whole body in blue water at that moment. After confirming her face and safety, Samael slowly pushed Skathash out of her arms. Once again, she rolled her eyes and found a face she recognized. Uriah, who was treated dearly by the master of the Mammon family as if she were his daughter, was looking at her while crouching in the corner of the mansion. Given the dog-like spirit and the baby dungeon meerkat, it was clear that this place was the house of Mammon. Samael Skathak carefully called her. She raised her head again and judged the situation quickly. Her own mana decreased sharply. All her senses connected to her subordinate spirits disappeared. She knew clearly what happened. Then, now wasn't the time to hesitate anymore. She cried out with full confidence in the relationship between the Mammon family and Citri. Abrasax, Orobas, and Bifrons sold the dungeon market. They attacked me and Citri. The dungeon market today is nothing but the puppet of the King of Pride. Her voice was transmitted through Lucia. Yong-ho opened his eyes. Catalina was at a loss of what to do while Chwiryong looked at him, clenching her teeth. It was the worst situation he didn't even imagine. It wasn't just like a simple internal uprising within the dungeon market. The dungeon market joined hands with the King of Pride. At that moment, Yong-ho realized something. It was as if a lightning bolt passed through his head. The King of Pride. If the new strongmen in the territory of the King of Gluttony gave up protecting it and dedicated their loyalty to somebody else, who would be their master? The King of Pride was still at war with the King of Envy. The King of Lust's territory was located between those of these two kings. Then, what was the position of the King of Lust? Did the King of Pride make an alliance with the King of Lust? What if the King of Pride took over the forces of the King of Gluttony and even the dungeon market? What could the king do with his increased power? Father, a woman's screaming broke his indulgence in such idle thoughts. Startled, he looked ahead. Gardimundi was trembling. In astonishment, she looked at the feather-shaped communication device connecting her and her father. Biryubakcha Gardimundi hadn't said anything yet. However, Yong-ho felt immediately what the King of Pride could do when he took possession of the dungeon market, and what could happen if the king attacked other forces. Gardimundi raised her head, confirming Yong-ho's conviction. The lords in the demon world traded their dungeon spirits at the dungeon market. It was no exaggeration to say that more than 90 of the spirits in the demon world were bought and sold at the dungeon market. All those spirits and the elite troops that could be deployed at any time. They were not the only items possessed by the dungeon market. But that didn't matter. Only the fact that the dungeon market managed them was important. The King of Lust was with the King of Pride. The army of the King of Gluttony knelt before the King of Pride. Just like he dealt with the King of Envy, the King of Pride didn't need to keep his invasion secret. His invasion of the territory of the Queen of Fury through the dungeon market was clearly an effective means, but he could not keep relying on it. But the lords under the command of the Queen of Fury were not suspicious of the dungeon market, just like the King of Envy's subordinates. They welcomed it, as always. At the moment when the Queen of Fury cheered with her forces, the King of Pride began massacres throughout the Queen's territory. The Queen of Fury, who became a red flash and struck the battlefield, was beautiful. As expected, she always led her own bodyguards to the battlefield as soon as a large-scale battle broke out. The King of Lust stretched his body's length. His hair, white like snow, fell down on his shoulders and chest. His red eyes stood out between his pale face. Since he could take any shape, regardless of age or sex, the King of Lust had no such thing as a true self. It was also impossible to identify himself because of the additional effect of the sin of lust from his birth. For this reason, the King of Lust chose one of his countless alter egos as his true self. Actually, he decided on it 1,000 years ago. It was something like a woman that the King of Lust believed as her true self. The King of Lust, Asmodeus, gently grasped the godly energy of lust. This new energy, which the king had separated on that day 1,000 years ago, greeted him gladly. It changed its shape from a dagger to a long and thin sword. In the distance, the Queen of Fury was fighting. She stood out among the forces fighting the army of the King of Pride. The Queen of Sloth had one of the 7 deadly sins and the godly energy, but he had no forces. The King of Violence had one of the forces and the godly energy, but he had no sin. Only the Queen of Fury had everything. 7 horns of light sprouted above the head of the King of Lust. Once called the best swordsman of the demon world, the King of Lust released the sin of lust from his fingertips. His heart was pounding. The King of Lust felt the Queen of Fury was on the battlefield now. The Queen of Fury also felt him, even though she was still hundreds of meters away from him. The Queen looked back exactly where the King was. She was startled to find him. The King of Lust had a sad smile. He stepped forward and moved to the Queen forcefully. "Let me go back now," Gardamundi said unwittingly. She was almost aghast. She served as the Queen of Fury's eyes and ears. At the same time, she was the only daughter of Biryubakcha, the king of the Garura clan. She could gather all sorts of information in real time. She instantly knew both the Queen of Fury and the Temple of the 8 Clans were in danger, so she could not stay any longer. She had to go back to help them. When she thought about the current situation rationally, what Gardamundi needed most now was the assistance of the House of Mammon. But she was not an idealist. She was convinced that Yongho hid something. It was foolish for her to trust somebody like him. She felt she made a mistake by telling him unwittingly that the Queen of Fury and the temple were in danger. She hastily turned, but Yongho grabbed her arm. He remembered what Citri had told him, as well as what the Queen of Fury told him about the importance of a southern alliance. The King of Pride was their enemy. He already began to take action. He took over the dungeon market and enlisted cooperation with the King of Lust. The remaining forces who lost their master, the King of Gluttony, were in the King of Pride's control. Perhaps his fighting with the King of Envy might have been over without anybody knowing, just like Yongho fighting the King of Gluttony. Yongho couldn't lose the Queen of Fury. She was his ally, who could confront the King of Pride. Gardamundi looked back at Yongho. Rather than explaining, he convinced her by action. He released the power of greed. The Temple of the 8 Clans was not a dungeon. There were no subtle traps or the darkness that blocked the vision in the temple built on the plains. Dark red smoke rose under the red sky. The beasts flocking to the smell of blood witnessed the slaughtering on the ground. Warriors from the alien world, death knights, vampire lords, archdemons, and nightshades. These 5-star monsters ran wildly, slaughtering everywhere in the temple. They built a barrier with the bodies of the representatives of the 8 clans gathered for the emergency meeting. They fought fiercely, but they were overpowered. Aside from their combat abilities, they were numerically inferior to these monsters. Orobas, the strongest Herculean power, took a cheerful step among them. His fists were already stained with the blood of the heads of the Maharaga clan and Karvinka. Chapter 250. Fury 4. Not all the heads of the 8 clans were strong. That was why Orobas felt them trivial after killing them. But he didn't feel bad because of that. He quickly realized how overwhelming his power was, which delighted him a lot. Indeed, Orobas had been practicing for many years. Because of his hard and continued training, he became stronger and became one of the 5 directors of the dungeon market at last. Given that anyone without one of the 7 deadly sins could not become a king, his inclusion into the 5-member executive council of the dungeon market was the highest position he could hope for as an individual. But he always felt he was inadequate. He wanted to be a little stronger. He felt he surpassed what he regarded as the ideal power of a man, but it didn't mean that his thirst for power was quenched. He indulged himself in excitement while killing them. He rushed to Kubaraika, the head of the Yaksha clan, who violently tore one of the warriors from the alien world. Orobas could become stronger since he was once a subordinate spirit, with his mana growing drastically. For a red demon like him, the growth of his mana was the same as the growth of his physical abilities. Orobas crushed the foolish Kubaraika like he destroyed the alien warrior. Orobas ripped apart his limbs with overwhelming force. Kubaraika, whose limbs were torn while he was alive, screamed terribly in pain, but Orobas ended his pain by trampling on his head. It was impossible to annihilate the forces of the Queen of Fury with a single surprise attack. However, it was possible to weaken the power of the entire 8 clans by killing their chiefs and destroying their main dungeons. The meeting of the chiefs of the 8 clans was truly a blessing to these monsters. They could achieve their intended purpose by annihilating the heads of the 8 clans here today. Maybe I've achieved more than that. Orobas looked west, rubbing against the ground. the soles of his shoes stained with the blood and brain water of the Yaksha clan's king, Kubaraika. Perhaps today could be the last day of the Queen of Fury who was running wildly on the battlefield. I really feel it's a regret. He wanted to fight the Queen. He felt the strong urge now because he became stronger by becoming the subordinate spirit of the King of Pride. The Queen of Fury didn't have the godly energy of Fury. Her status as the Queen was not complete. So, she could not show a miraculous power like the Queen of Sloth, Citri. So, he could fight her, but he felt it was unlikely he would have a chance to fight her. He turned his body with a happy smile. He grabbed Maharaga's head and crushed him, who launched a surprise attack from behind. Think of it as a glory that you were killed by the strongest red demon ever, Orobas said in excitement. It seemed he was influenced by Abrasax, who mingled with him recently. But it didn't matter to him. Obviously, Orobas himself was the strongest red demon ever. Shrugging once, Orobas stepped forward. He shouted loudly to find and kill the remaining heads of the 8 clans. While he was stepping forward, he could feel each of the chiefs of the 8 clans weeping, fleeing, or fighting desperately. His shouting, which could be heard 500 meters in radius, now resonated over 700 meters away. Orobas went to the trouble of shouting toward the entrance of the temple, then stopped suddenly. He felt the presence of another being that he didn't expect was here in the temple. Somehow, he was overwhelmed by uneasiness. He turned immediately. It was a red demon like Orobas himself. The Queen of Fury shouted loudly. Disguised as a giant with the thruster energy, she rolled on the ground and swung the huge axe in her hand. Overpowered by her fierce attack, the forces of the King of Gluttony shuddered and fell on the ground. The tide of the battlefield, which had once been overturned in favor of the King of Gluttony's forces, was overturned once again. The Queen's forces maintained the momentum and crushed their opponents like waves hitting a breakwater. The Queen of Fury hurriedly raised herself and took out a new weapon while reinforcing her strength by releasing the thruster energy. Although she was fighting in the middle of tens of thousands of forces on both sides, she could get out of them bravely. Of course, the troops opened the way partly because of her devastating strength, but they were also distracted by a woman with her eyes half closed right in front of them. She was standing there with her long red hair falling down her shoulders. Every time the woman with pure white hair brandished her sword, the sky and the earth split. She dispersed their large troops with her sword to make way for the Queen. The Queen of Fury breathed wildly. Clenching her teeth, the Queen stared at the woman. With 7 horns of light on her head, the woman looked toward the Queen only dozens of meters away, as if she was waiting for the Queen to stand up. The King of Lust. The king changed not only his look, but also his gender from a man to a woman. The tremendous manner that the king released from his 7 horns, his strong fighting spirit that the Queen could feel even though he was dozens of meters away. The transcendent sword energy that separated heaven and earth. Only the King of Lust had such abilities. Who could have all of those things except for the sword demon, Asmodeus? The Queen of Fury soon shot up her 6 horns. She erased all the idle thoughts that came to her mind at the moment. She didn't concern herself about the possibility of an alliance between the King of Gluttony and the King of Lust, as well as the disappearance of the King of Gluttony. She needed to focus only on fighting her opponent right now. At one point, the Queen hit the ground and charged at the king. The Queen, disguised as a red giant, quickly crossed the distance of dozens of meters and landed right before the king. The King of Lust looked at her indifferently, but the Queen hit the ground, striking the king with the axe of lightning. Bang! A bolt of lightning struck right in front of the king, but it missed the target like before. It wasn't that the king avoided the attack by stepping aside lightly. It was also not because space was distorted or the invisible force pushed aside her axe of lightning. The Queen cursed at herself. Even before she hit the target, she twisted the trajectory of the axe of lightning. She didn't hit the king. It was ridiculous, but the Queen was serious. She couldn't hit her target properly because she was distracted whenever she attacked the king. Nonetheless, the King of Lust stepped forward. He approached the red giant and gently swung his sword. Everything within the trajectory of the sword split. The Queen of Fury twisted her body desperately, but she could not stop the left arm of the giant from being cut off. "Your Majesty, do not come." The Queen and Kirtimukha shouted almost simultaneously. Since she was the Queen of Fury, she could even try to attack the Queen. The queen pulled up the axe of lightning stuck in the ground, but the king of lust again swung his sword against her, and the queen released the full power of the red giant without any hesitation this time. The axe of lightning again hit the ground hard. After lowering her posture and letting his sword over her head, the queen moved her right hand to send off the lightning right before the king. Since she found it hard to attack the king directly, she wanted to mount an indirect attack as best as she could. A thunderbolt bounced and the ground exploded. The fragments of lightning struck the king of lust along with dirt, but the king quickly swung his sword to block all of those attacks. This time, the queen made a bold run toward the king and attacked his heart with the lightning that she accumulated until now. The Queen of Fury felt intense pain in her chest because she was kicked hard by the king when the thunderbolt struck. She bounced off over a dozen meters and rolled on the ground. "Your Majesty!" At last, the queen's bodyguards gathered around the queen. Even though he was covered with the fragments of lightning, the King of Fury was not wounded at all except for some damage to his clothes. But the Queen of Fury was not frustrated because she could ascertain that her indirect attack paid off. Now she felt she could turn the tide. The King of Lust looked silently at the queen. Instead of being angry or mocking, he lifted up the godly energy of lust. Then he activated one of the true powers of lust when it was united with the godly energy of lust. The king's mana wrapped around the surrounding area, but the queen unconsciously activated the power of fury and pushed his mana. But it was only the queen who could do that. Those exposed to the king's mana made a revolt against their master. The queen's bodyguards who gathered around her held their weapons, targeting her. They began to attack her like crazy. "Your Majesty!" It was only Kirtimuka, her subordinate spirit, among her bodyguards that did not lose her reasoning. The queen hurriedly tossed both arms and wielded mana. After pushing them back with an invisible force, she shouted ferociously toward the King of Lust. She maximized the power of fury that became more violent when she got angrier. But the King of Lust didn't care. As soon as he noticed the loophole when the queen pushed back her bodyguards, the king charged at her, targeting her neck with the sword. A bolt of lightning struck. Then the sword split the space. Then the flames of the red lotus rained down between the two bang. The atmosphere was torn with a roar. The earth shook violently, and the green flames of the red lotus engulfed both the lighting and the sword, whose remnants scattered in different directions from the trajectory they originally intended. The magic spear was engulfed with the green flames of the red lotus. It was the first time the Queen of Fury had ever seen it, but she felt thrilled. The moment she saw the spear, her heart started to beat. Only then did the King of Lust make some expression on his face. He looked at the spear blankly. There was astonishment on his pale face. He knew the name of the spear. Once again, the green flames arose greatly and separated the two. The Queen of Fury grabbed her chest before she knew it. She felt like her heart was about to burst when she noticed the man holding the magic spear of the red lotus as soon as the flames disappeared. The Sin of Fury roared. It showed a strong desire toward her half, but the queen's heart was beating more violently, apart from the resonance of the Sin of Fury. The King of Lust trembled. It wasn't because of the godly energy of fury that began to roar with the Sin of Fury. He trembled because of the one who was standing before him, staring at him with the magic spear in hand. The King of Greed Yong-ho did not answer. Instead, he swung Aemon, the magic spear of the red lotus, toward the king.